Welcome to Sissy Fantasy World, where every story sparkles. Don't forget to subscribe for more magic. The first time I saw her. I still remember the first time I saw her. It wasn't love, not in the way people mean it. It was something deeper, stranger, like recognition. As if I'd been walking through life half asleep, and suddenly, in one breath, she was there to wake me. It happened backstage at a concert hall where I worked part-time. I was just another quiet face in the background, managing costumes and fixing small wardrobe malfunctions for the performers. My job was invisible, and I liked it that way. That night, I was delivering a white silk gown to the dressing room of the headliner, her. She was known everywhere as the Blonde. Her real name didn't matter, her presence did. People spoke of her like a secret that traveled through sound checks and whispered corners, the kind of person you didn't meet, you experienced. When I opened the door, she was standing before a mirror, brushing her hair. For a moment, the air in the room felt different. Heavy, but not suffocating, more like it was watching. She looked up, eyes catching mine in the reflection. They were pale, almost silver, shimmering with something that felt ancient and knowing. "You brought it," she said softly, her voice low and deliberate. "Yes," I managed, holding out the dress carefully. I didn't know why my hands trembled. Her gaze lingered on me, studying me the way one might study a painting they'd seen before but couldn't quite place. Then she smiled, a small, knowing smile. "You've got gentle hands, Ryan," she said. "Gentleness always finds its way back." I didn't understand what she meant. I only nodded and set the dress down, desperate to escape the quiet intensity of her stare. But as I turned to leave, she added something that stopped me cold. "Don't be afraid if you start seeing yourself differently," she said. "Change can start anywhere, even here." I looked back at her, confused, but she had already turned away, lost again in her reflection. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing in front of that mirror, the pale silk gleaming like moonlight. Her voice kept repeating in my mind, "Seeing yourself differently." At some point, I drifted into a dream. I was back in that same room, but she was gone. Instead, I stood before the mirror wearing the very dress I had delivered. My hair was longer, my face softer. I looked like me, but not quite. A different version, a quieter, truer one. And behind me, faintly reflected in the mirror's light, stood her. Her voice was calm, steady, close enough to feel. "You see, she's been waiting." When I woke, my heart was pounding. I sat up, rubbing my face, trying to laugh it off, but my reflection in the dark window seemed to hold her gaze. Something had changed. When the reflection blinked back, the morning light felt too bright that day, as if the world had turned up its volume. I stared into the bathroom mirror, half expecting to see traces of the dream still clinging to my face, but everything looked the same, or almost the same. My skin seemed clearer, my expression softer somehow. Maybe I just slept too little. I tried to shake the thought away and focus on work, but as I brushed my hair, my hand paused halfway. For a second, the reflection didn't follow. It was so slight that I could have imagined it, but my heart thudded anyway. I whispered, "Get a grip, Ryan." The reflection whispered nothing back, just stared with a kind of patient curiosity. At the theater, the world moved on as if nothing strange had happened. People carried cables, argued about lighting angles, tuned instruments. I moved through it like a ghost in my own body, and then she appeared again. The Blonde swept in wearing sunglasses despite the dim light, her coat trailing like a curtain behind her. She smiled when she saw me, the way a performer recognizes a familiar tune. "Morning, Ryan," she said. "How's your mirror?" The question hit so suddenly that I almost dropped the fabric I was carrying. "My mirror." She nodded. "You looked into it this morning, didn't you?" I hesitated, unsure whether to be unnerved or intrigued. "I did," I admitted. Her smile deepened just enough to look secretive. "Good, keep looking. That's where it starts." She walked away before I could ask what she meant, her perfume lingering behind her like a trail of invisible silk. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Every surface that threw back my image, polished floors, metal panels, dark windows, seemed to hold a slightly different version of me. One where my shoulders sat a little narrower, where my posture looked more graceful than I'd ever been. It wasn't dramatic, just subtle enough to make me question what was real. That night, I sat at my small desk, the only lamp casting a warm circle of light. I opened the notebook where I usually scribbled schedules and costume notes. Instead, I found myself writing. There's someone in the mirror. She's not a stranger. She's patient. I didn't know why I wrote it. The words came on their own, as if someone guided my hand. When I closed the notebook, my reflection in the window smiled a fraction of a second later than I did. Rina, I whispered, testing the sound. It was a name that had surfaced from nowhere, yet it felt like home in my mouth. Softer than Ryan, rounder, calmer. The reflection's lips shaped the same word, perfectly matched. The next day, the blonde asked me to assist during her costume fitting. I followed her into the dressing room again, nerves buzzing. She looked at me through the mirror as I adjusted a strap on her gown. "You've been listening," she said. I swallowed. Listening to what? "To her," she said, tapping the glass. "The one who looks back." I stopped, because denying it felt dishonest. Her tone softened, almost kind. "Don't be frightened, Ryan. She's not here to take you away. She's here to show you who's been waiting underneath." Her words sank deep, quiet as breath but heavy as truth. When I got home, I stood before my own mirror again, trembling but curious. The reflection didn't look different this time, but it felt different. There was warmth in her eyes, a softness that seemed to reach through the glass. "Rina," I said again. And this time, she smiled first. The sound of a different voice. The morning after she smiled back from the mirror, the world didn't look the same anymore. Maybe it was just that I was seeing it differently. The streets on my walk to the theater looked brighter, the colors a little sharper, the faces in passing somehow more curious. Every few steps, I caught myself wondering if people could tell that something inside me had shifted. When I greeted the stage manager, my voice came out quieter, smoother. He blinked and said, "Didn't recognize you for a second, Ryan. You sound calmer." I smiled faintly. Guess I finally slept. It was the truth in a way. For the first time in months, I had slept, really slept, the kind of rest that feels like forgiveness. That day the rehearsals dragged on for hours. The blonde was working on a new number, a haunting melody that sounded like the echo of a dream. Between verses, she would glance at me, her expression unreadable. Once, during a break, she motioned for me to come closer. "Hold this," she said, passing me a golden comb. I did. It was warm, though it had been resting on a cold table. She turned toward the mirror. "Do you know why mirrors matter, Ryan?" I shook my head. "They tell the truth," she said, "even when we're not ready to hear it." She met my eyes in the reflection. "You've started to hear it, haven't you?" I hesitated. Something changing. I don't know what it means. She smiled softly. "It means you're learning to see yourself without flinching." The way she said it made my chest tighten. For a moment I wanted to thank her, but she had already turned back to her reflection, humming under her breath. That night I walked home through the drizzle, my coat pulled tight. The rain softened the city's noise into a steady lullaby. At a shop window, I caught my reflection again. The streetlight blurred across the glass, my outline faint. My hair, damp and clinging, looked longer somehow. I pressed my hand to the glass and whispered, "Rina." A small comfort warmed my chest. When I reached my apartment, I toweled off and stood before the mirror again. I tried to describe aloud what I saw, the way the blonde had asked me to. Different posture, softer jawline maybe, or maybe I'm imagining things, I said. My voice had changed. It wasn't higher exactly, it was smoother, more deliberate. I smiled, and the reflection smiled back in perfect time. "Okay, Rina," I said quietly, "maybe you are real." The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. No signature, just a folded scrap of music paper with neat handwriting. "Dress rehearsal tonight. Bring something that feels like you." There was no question who it came from. I stared at it for a long time, then opened my closet. My wardrobe was all black t-shirts, jeans, and work jackets, clothes that erased rather than revealed. But tucked at the back, almost forgotten, was an old soft scarf I once bought for no reason. Pale rose, light as breath. I wrapped it around my neck before leaving for the theater. It didn't feel like a disguise. It felt like recognition. When I arrived, the blonde noticed immediately. Her lips curved in that slow, knowing smile. "There you are," she said. "Now you look like someone who's ready to perform." I laughed nervously. "I'm no performer." She tilted her head. "Everyone who finds their truth performs, Ryan. We just call it living." That night's rehearsal was different. She sang, and I moved the curtains, carried costumes, adjusted props. But each time her voice rose, something inside me responded. The song told of transformation, of light becoming shadow, of a name whispered until it turned real. When the final note faded, she looked at me. "Your turn," she said. "My turn for what?" "Say her name," she said, eyes bright. Not as a question, as an answer. I swallowed hard, the air in the empty theater thick around us. Then I whispered, "Rina." The sound filled the space like music, echoing off the walls. For the first time, it didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned. The blonde smiled. "Now you can hear yourself." After everyone left, I stayed behind. The stage was dark except for one lingering spotlight. I stood in it, alone, listening to the faint hum of the lights. My hands trembled, but not from fear. I thought about everything, about the mirrors, the smiles, the quiet power in her words. Maybe she hadn't possessed me at all. Maybe she'd simply uncovered what had always been waiting. I took a deep breath, straightened my posture, and looked toward the reflection in the black piano lid at the edge of the stage. "Good night, Rina," I said. And the reflection, calm and certain, mouthed back good night. When the world began to notice. By the end of that week, I could feel it, the quiet ripple of attention that followed me through every room. Not loud, not unkind, just curious. Eyes lingered half a second longer than usual. Voices softened when they said my name, as though testing its shape. It started in the simplest ways. Someone at the coffee shop smiled and said, "Good morning, miss," before realizing. Their cheeks went red, they stammered, apologizing. I only smiled back and said, "It's okay." But it wasn't embarrassment that lingered, it was warmth. Something invisible was shifting, and I could feel it every time I looked into a mirror or caught my reflection in a window. It wasn't vanity, it was acknowledgement. At the theater, the atmosphere had changed too. People treated me differently, though no one could quite explain why. One of the lighting techs, Mason, stopped me backstage. "Hey, you're glowing lately," he said awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "You good?" I laughed lightly. "Yeah, just figuring some things out." He nodded. "Whatever it is, it suits you." That night, the blonde seemed even more distant, almost watchful. She barely spoke during rehearsal, but every now and then, when our eyes met, I saw something like approval flicker in her gaze. After everyone left, I lingered as usual, pretending to tidy the stage ropes. But she called out quietly, "Rina." I froze. She never said it before. Hearing her say it out loud made something deep inside me settle into place. She walked toward me slowly, her long coat swaying with the rhythm of her steps. "You've stopped resisting," she said. "I guess I just stopped pretending," I answered. She smiled faintly. "Same thing." Her words hung in the dim light, echoing. Then she turned, leaving me alone under the fading spotlight. The next morning, I walked through the city with a new kind of calm. It wasn't about hiding anymore, it was about existing. I moved differently, not forcing myself to match what anyone expected. When I passed a shop window, I saw my reflection again, framed in the morning light. The pale scarf, the loosened posture, the quiet confidence. It struck me that I didn't look like someone else. I looked like someone who had finally stopped apologizing. That afternoon, the blonde invited me to her dressing room for the first time. It was full of light, perfume, and old photographs, black and white prints of her standing beside other performers. eyes bright with the same unshakable certainty she carried now. "Sit," she said softly, pointing to a chair by the mirror. I sat. She brushed through a wig on the table, a cascade of gold, like sunlight captured in silk. "I've worn this for years," she said, holding it up. "It became a part of me. Every time I put it on, I remembered who I was supposed to be." Then she placed it in my hands. "And now, I think it's time someone else remembers too." My heart thudded. I can't." "Rina," she interrupted, her tone gentle but unyielding. "You already have." I didn't understand at first, but when I looked up, I saw my own reflection beside hers. The way my eyes softened, the way my lips parted just slightly, the way the golden strands caught the light. It wasn't about pretending to be her. It was about letting that hidden version of me finally breathe. That night, I went home and laid the wig carefully on the table, like something sacred. My hands trembled as I touched it again. When I put it on, the room seemed to shift. The air itself grew quieter. I met my reflection, and for the first time I didn't flinch, didn't doubt, didn't apologize. Rina looked back at me, real, certain, and ready. The next morning, I woke with the golden strands still lying across my pillow. I laughed softly, tracing them with my fingertips. The city outside buzzed with life, but for the first time I didn't feel lost in it. I belonged to it. Or maybe it finally belonged to me. And in that stillness, one thought whispered through my mind, calm and sure. This is who I was always meant to be. Stepping into the light. The first time I stepped outside as Rina, really as her, not as a secret or rehearsal, I expected the sky to fall. But it didn't. The world went on turning, traffic hummed, people hurried past, the city breathed. And yet everything was different. The difference wasn't in the world, it was in me. The golden wig shimmered softly in the daylight, brushing my shoulders as I walked. My reflection winked from shop windows and bus stops, and every time I saw her, I felt that strange mixture of fear and freedom swirl together. My heart pounded, but not from panic, from aliveness. At the corner cafe, the barista did a double take before smiling. "Morning, Rina," she said, as though the name had always belonged to me. Hearing it out loud still made me tremble. "Morning," I managed to reply. Her smile didn't change. That was when I realized most people weren't cruel. They were just curious, unsure, waiting to see if you'd apologize for being yourself. And when you didn't, they followed your lead. At rehearsal that evening, whispers floated around the stage before I even arrived. Mason looked at me, blinked twice, and then grinned. "Well," he said, "you weren't kidding about figuring things out." I blushed, laughing softly. "Guess it shows." "Yeah," he said, "but in a good way, you look honest." The blonde, as always, watched from the wings. She said nothing at first, but as I adjusted the props, I felt her gaze, steady, assessing, but softer than before. When everyone left for the night, she approached quietly. "I see you've started walking without looking for permission," she said. I nodded. I think I finally stopped waiting for someone to give it. She smiled, slow and proud. "That's how you know it's real." There was no magic in her words, no mystery this time, just truth, and it settled into me like warmth after a long winter. Days passed. The theater's final performance drew near, a charity gala that would fill every seat. I worked backstage as usual, but now the cast treated me differently, less like the quiet assistant, more like a presence that couldn't be ignored. Not because I demanded it. Because authenticity glows, and people notice light when they've been staring at shadows too long. Sometimes I'd still catch myself in the mirror and think, is this really me? But then I'd remember her voice, the blonde's voice, telling me that mirrors never lie. A week before the gala, she handed me a sealed envelope. "Don't open it yet," she said. "Not until the night of the show." "What's inside?" I asked. She only smiled. A reminder. That night, I dreamt of the stage, not the way it looked, but the way it felt. The lights, the silence before a performance, the heartbeat of 1,000 breaths waiting for a moment to begin. And somewhere in that dream, I heard my own voice, clear, certain, unshaken, calling out from the dark. Rina. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a statement. The next morning, I walked through the city with that sound still ringing in my ears. I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. The rhythm of footsteps, the rustle of wind against glass, the way sunlight caught in strangers' hair. The world hadn't changed. But I had, and that made everything brighter. Even the silence felt kinder now. That evening, when I reached the theater, I saw the blonde standing at the far end of the stage, half in shadow. "You're ready," she said simply. "For what?" "To stop borrowing my light," she said, "and start shining your own." Before I could reply, she turned and walked toward the dressing room. I stood there, frozen, the echo of her words settling around me like soft gold dust. When the rehearsal lights dimmed and the stage went dark, I caught my reflection one last time in the piano lid at the edge of the stage. The same calm eyes looked back, the same golden hair catching the dim light. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I was staring at someone else. I was home in my own reflection. And when I whispered my name, just once under my breath, it wasn't a secret anymore. Rina. It sounded steady, beautiful, whole. The night of the gala. The city glowed, that night like it had been painted fresh for me. Every street lamp shimmered in the drizzle, and the air smelled of rain and nervous electricity. My reflection followed me in puddles, store windows, and bus doors. Rina, walking steady, eyes forward. The gala was the biggest event of the year. The theater's marble steps were crowded with guests in gowns and tuxedos, the air thick with perfume, champagne laughter, and camera flashes. I stayed near the back entrance, badge clipped to my jacket, pretending I belonged to the background. But deep down, I knew that pretending was over. In my pocket, the sealed envelope burned like a secret waiting to be spoken. Backstage, everything was a blur of movement. The orchestra tuned, lights flickered, crew members whispered into headsets. I tried to keep busy, checking props, fixing curtains, but my hands trembled with a strange, restless energy. Mason found me near the stage ropes. "You okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed. I smiled faintly. "Yeah, just feels different tonight." He nodded slowly, studying me for a moment. "You look different too. Not just the hair or clothes, it's something else. You seem lighter." "Maybe I am," I said softly. He grinned. "Good, keep it that way." The blonde's dressing room door was ajar, golden light spilling out. I hesitated, then stepped inside. She was seated before the mirror, brushing through her long platinum wig with deliberate strokes. When she looked up, her eyes caught mine in the reflection. "Do you have it?" she asked. I nodded, holding up the envelope. "Open it," she said simply. I sat down and tore it carefully along the edge. Inside was a folded sheet of music, handwritten in her elegant cursive. No title, just a melody, haunting and unfinished. At the bottom, a single line in ink. "Every performance ends, but the truth stays." I looked up confused. "What does it mean?" She smiled faintly, setting her brush down. "It means my part of your story is over." My chest tightened. "You're leaving." "Not leaving," she said. "Just stepping aside. You've already learned what you came here for." I shook my head. "I didn't come here too." "Yes, you did," she interrupted softly. "You just didn't know it then." She stood, walked toward me, and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You don't need me anymore, Rina. You've become your own mirror." Her words hit like the final note of a song you never wanted to end. The show began. I moved through the chaos of cues and stage changes, but my thoughts drifted, floating above the sound. The blonde's voice soared through the air like something from another world, but this time I wasn't standing in her shadow. I was watching, not hiding, not wishing, just seeing her for what she truly was, a guide, not a ghost. And as her last song faded, she looked straight at me through the spotlight's haze, nodded once, and smiled. That smile said everything. "It's your turn now." When the curtain fell, the applause rose like a storm. People cheered, stood, whistled, clapped until the air vibrated. I stood backstage, heart racing, tears in my eyes. The blonde bowed, radiant. Then, instead of walking off stage, she extended her hand toward the wings, toward me. The crew looked around, murmuring. I froze. "Come on," she said softly, her voice carrying through the silence. My legs moved before my thoughts caught up. I stepped into the light, every muscle shaking, the sound of applause swallowing the silence behind me. It was blinding, the lights, the faces, the sheer reality of it. But then I looked at her, and she nodded. So I bowed. It was small, uncertain, but it was mine. The audience didn't know who I was or why she'd brought me forward, but it didn't matter. The sound of their applause wasn't for understanding, it was for being seen. After the show, people crowded backstage, congratulating, laughing, crying. The blonde vanished quietly, her dressing room door left open, the mirror still warm from her reflection. On her table lay the golden wig. I realized with a pang of recognition she'd left it behind. Maybe she knew I didn't need it anymore. Later that night, I stood alone on the empty stage. The lights were dim, the seats dark and silent. The smell of perfume and roses lingered in the air. I walked to the center, where the spotlight had burned earlier, and looked out at the empty rows. The silence felt like peace now, not loneliness. I whispered, "Thank you." The word echoed softly, then disappeared into the velvet dark. I didn't know if I was thanking her, the city, or myself, maybe all of it. Because for the first time, I wasn't standing in borrowed light. I was glowing all on my own. That night, back home, I placed the music sheet beside my bed. Its unfinished melody looked strange and beautiful under the lamp. I realized that maybe some songs weren't meant to end. Maybe they were meant to be lived. And when I looked into the mirror one last time before sleep, the woman looking back didn't feel like a secret, a dream, or a disguise. She was simply me. Rina. Whole, quiet, real. And finally free. The morning after the spotlight. The next morning, I woke to silence. No alarms, no rehearsal calls, no rush of footsteps or echo of applause. Just the soft hum of rain against my window and the pale gold light filtering through the curtains. It was strange, that quiet. For months, my life had revolved around that stage, the rehearsals, the lights, the blonde's cryptic wisdom. And now it was just me. I made coffee, barefoot, wrapped in a blanket, and caught my reflection in the kitchen window. The woman looking back at me was the same one who had bowed under the stage lights, but her eyes were softer now. There was no fear, no question, just calm. For the first time, I didn't wonder how people saw me. I wondered how I saw myself. And that question, surprisingly, no longer hurt to ask. The city felt slower that week, or maybe I was the one slowing down. I walked through the park every morning, watching people hurry by, parents pushing strollers, students with backpacks, street vendors setting up their carts. No one stared anymore. Or maybe they did, and I just didn't care. Mason texted once, asking if I'd come by the theater soon. I sent back a simple message, maybe later, for now I just need to breathe. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. That was enough. Days turned into a rhythm. Morning walks, quiet breakfasts, journaling by the window. The kind of peace I never realized I'd been craving. But sometimes, when the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of faded lilac, I'd find myself thinking about her, the blonde. Where she went. What she meant when she said I'd become my own mirror. One evening, I found myself drawn back to the theater. I didn't plan it. My feet just carried me there. It was empty now, quiet and dust-scented. The posters from the gala still hung by the doors, curling at the edges. I stepped onto the stage, the boards creaking faintly under my shoes. The spotlight was off, but I didn't need it anymore. I could still feel where it had been, the warmth of it on my face, the pulse of it in my chest. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence. Then, softly, I began to hum. The melody came out instinctively, the same one from the music sheet the blonde had left me. I didn't know all the notes, but it didn't matter. I filled the gaps with breath and feeling, not perfection. And as the sound floated up to the rafters, I could almost feel her presence, faint but certain, like the echo of memory. For a moment, I imagined her voice joining mine, the harmony smooth and sure. Then it faded, leaving just me. And that felt right. I sat down on the edge of the stage, the empty seats stretching before me like an ocean. My scarf slipped from my shoulder, and I caught it, laughing softly. Everything about this place used to feel too big for me. Now it just felt familiar. The truth was, I didn't need to be on stage anymore. The real transformation hadn't happened under lights or music. It had happened in silence, in mirrors, in the quiet moments when no one was watching. That's what the blonde had meant. That was the reminder. The performance ends, but the truth stays. When I left the theater that night, the city was quiet. A gentle mist rolled off the river, catching the streetlights in soft halos. I walked home without rushing, each step unhurried, deliberate. Passing a boutique window, I caught my reflection again, golden hair tucked beneath a hat, the faintest smile on my lips. And this time, I didn't pause to study it. I just smiled and kept walking. Because for once, I didn't need proof anymore. I knew. That night, before bed, I placed the golden wig back on its stand by the mirror, not as a disguise or a relic, but as a keepsake. A reminder of where I began. I whispered into the stillness. "Thank you for showing me how to see." The lights flickered softly, as if answering. And with that, I turned off the lamp and let the quiet world wrap around me like the last soft note of a song that didn't need to end. Finding her own voice. It started with a notebook. Nothing grand, just a plain journal with soft paper and a bent corner, the kind you buy without meaning to keep. I opened it one morning by the window, the sky washed pale with early sun, and wrote a single line. I used to live in echoes. The pen hovered there for a while before the next words followed. Once they began, they didn't stop. By evening, the first few pages were filled. I didn't write about wigs or mirrors or even the blonde. I wrote about sound, how a voice can change the shape of a room, how silence can carry weight, how becoming someone new sometimes feels like remembering someone forgotten. It wasn't a confession. It was a translation, turning feelings into language, trying to understand the rhythm of who I'd become. Every page made the world make a little more sense. A week later, Mason called. "There's an open mic night at the Small Arts Cafe," he said. "You should read something." I laughed. "Me? No one wants to hear my scribbles." He chuckled. "Maybe they're not scribbles. Maybe they're exactly what someone needs." That thought stayed with me for days. The night of the open mic was quiet and warm. The cafe lights were dim, fairy bulbs soft, the air thick with the smell of coffee and old wood. People murmured at small tables, their voices like threads weaving through the hum of soft music. I sat near the back, notebook in hand, rehearsing under my breath. My palms were sweating, my heart unsteady. When my name was called, Rina, I stood. The room blurred for a moment, the sound of my own footsteps louder than the crowd's applause. But when I reached the microphone and looked out at the faces, something inside me steadied. The first words trembled out. "I used to live in echoes." And the cafe went silent. I read for 5 minutes, just 5. About the fear of reflections, about how identity isn't a costume you put on, but a truth you stop taking off, about the way light feels when you finally stop hiding from it. When I finished, there was a pause, a quiet so deep it felt alive. Then came the applause, gentle but real. One woman in the front wiped her eyes. A man near the counter smiled like he'd been holding his breath the whole time. In that moment, I realized I wasn't performing. I was sharing. And that was enough. After the reading, people came up to talk. A student said, "Your story, it felt like something I've been trying to say." Another whispered, "Thank you for being brave." I didn't feel brave, but maybe bravery wasn't the absence of fear. It was simply speaking through it. Weeks passed, and the cafe invited me back. Each time, the crowd grew a little bigger, the lights a little warmer. I began to write pieces for others, poems about beginnings, small talks about change, quiet essays about being seen. My voice, once something I'd spent years hiding, had become a bridge. One night, as I packed up my notebook, I found the old sheet of music tucked between its pages, the unfinished melody the blonde had written. I smiled. There, in the margin, I added the final line she'd left open. Every performance ends, but the truth stays. And beneath it I wrote, "So we keep singing." I closed the notebook and looked around the empty cafe, the smell of coffee lingering, the faint hum of the city outside. The world wasn't a stage anymore. It was a conversation. And for the first time, I didn't need the lights or applause. Just the sound of my own voice, steady and real, filling the space where silence used to live. The world that found me. The first time someone filmed my reading, I didn't even know. It was just another Thursday night at the cafe. The air smelled like cinnamon and ink, and the small crowd swayed with each word. I had no idea that one girl near the corner, with a silver phone balanced on her latte cup, would change everything. By morning, the clip had thousands of views. The title read, "Rina, the girl who writes like she's remembering a dream." I watched it once, twice, then again. It didn't even look like me, not the me I remembered. The soft lighting caught my hair like threads of gold. My hands moved with grace I didn't know I had. My voice, quiet but clear, filled the cafe like it belonged there. For the first time, I saw what others saw. Not someone pretending. Someone becoming. Comments poured in. "She speaks what I can't say. This feels like healing. Who is she?" I wasn't used to being called she by strangers. It should have scared me, but it didn't. It felt right, like something that had been waiting quietly behind a locked door. Still, the attention made my hands shake. Mason texted, "You're going viral." I didn't know whether to laugh or hide. Within weeks, small podcasts wanted to interview me. Local radio hosts called me the mysterious writer who reads in whispers. The cafe added more chairs. I started receiving letters, some from people who felt lost, others from those who said my words had helped them feel seen. Every message carried a heartbeat. Everyone reminded me, someone, somewhere understood. But with it came something I hadn't felt in a long time, pressure. The world began to ask questions I didn't know how to answer. Who was Rina, really? Was she a persona, a symbol, a secret performance? I'd wake up and stare at my reflection, the same mirror I used to avoid. Now it reflected someone known, someone expected. The girl who wore quiet confidence like perfume. But behind her eyes, I still saw the echoes of Ryan. Not haunting me, just waiting for acknowledgement. One afternoon, I sat at the same window where I'd written my first line. The city hummed softly outside. I opened my journal again, but the words came slower this time. I wrote, "Becoming Rina didn't mean erasing Ryan. It meant translating him." Tears slipped down my cheek before I noticed. The world saw a transformation. But to me, it was a conversation between two selves, one who had carried silence, and one who finally had the courage to speak. When the cafe owner asked if I'd like to host a solo night, I said yes. It wasn't about fame. It was about closure. About standing in front of everyone, the ones who only knew Rina and the few who once knew Ryan, and letting them both exist in the same breath. That night, the stage lights were low and golden. My dress flowed softly, the fabric brushing my skin like reassurance. The microphone hummed as I touched it. "I used to live in echoes," I began again. Then I paused, smiled, and added, "But echoes don't disappear, they evolve." The audience was silent, listening. And as I spoke, I realized something extraordinary. The story wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a mirror for others, too, each listener seeing their own version of transformation, acceptance, or becoming. When the applause rose, it wasn't for the performance. It was for the truth. Later that night, when I stepped outside, the air was cool and the sky wide with stars. I breathed it in and whispered to the quiet street. We did it. Not just Rina. Not just Ryan. We. And for the first time, there was peace in that word. Becoming whole. Months passed, and life settled into a rhythm, not dramatic or dazzling, just quietly real. The city felt different now. The streets I used to walk with my head down had become familiar, gentle even. Faces I once feared would judge me now smiled or waved. A few recognized me from the cafe, sometimes whispering, "That's Rina." It still startled me, that name echoing in public. But it no longer felt like a disguise. It felt like an arrival. I'd moved into a small apartment above a bookstore, the kind that always smelled like rain and paper. My window overlooked the river. Every morning I'd watch the sunrise paint the water with soft gold and lavender. Sometimes, when the light hit just right, I'd see both versions of myself reflected in the glass, Ryan's quiet stare blending with Rena's softer smile. It didn't scare me anymore. It felt balanced. My old life still existed somewhere, photographs in boxes, names in old group chats, clothes folded away. I didn't throw them out. They were part of the map that led here. One evening, I opened a dusty box and found a photo of Ryan, sitting on a stone wall, guitar in hand, eyes fixed somewhere far away. For a moment, I just looked at it, feeling that familiar ache of nostalgia. Then, gently, I whispered, "Thank you." Because without him, I'd never have found her. That week, Mason stopped by the cafe. He grinned when he saw me. "You know, they're calling you the voice of quiet courage now," he said. I laughed. "That's poetic, but it sounds too big for me." He shook his head. "You don't get to choose that. You just lived honestly, the rest followed." Maybe he was right. Maybe all this time, I'd been chasing an idea of transformation when, in truth, I'd simply been learning how to live unfiltered. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a small local arts festival, not as a performer, but as myself. The organizers said they wanted me to talk about authenticity. The word made me smile. It used to terrify me. The hall was small, warm, filled with soft chatter and the hum of anticipation. I stood on stage in a simple white blouse, my hair tied loosely back. No performance, no act, just me. I took a breath and began. For years, I thought I had to become someone else to be loved. But it turns out, I just needed to stop pretending I wasn't already enough. The audience went quiet, listening. I talked about Ryan, not as someone to hide, but as the beginning of the story. I talked about Rina not as an ending, but as a continuation. About how identity isn't a costume or a mask, but a dialogue between every version of yourself that's ever tried to be seen. When I finished, there wasn't applause right away. Just a hush, the kind that means people felt something real. Then the clapping came, slow and heartfelt, rising like a tide. Afterward, a young person approached me, notebook clutched to their chest. Their voice trembled as they said, "Your story, it made me feel like maybe I don't have to hide anymore." I smiled, gently touching their shoulder. "You never did. You just needed to see someone else stop hiding first." They nodded, eyes bright with quiet relief. And in that moment, I realized something. Every time I spoke, every time I wrote, I wasn't just sharing my journey. I was lighting a small lantern for someone else who was still walking through their own darkness. The years ahead didn't promise perfection. There were still days of doubt, moments when the world's noise tried to drown my calm. But now I had something stronger, a truth that didn't depend on validation, appearance, or applause. Some nights, I'd sit by the window, the city lights shimmering like scattered dreams, and I'd hum that old unfinished song from The Blonde. Only now, it had a different ending. Not one of possession or fear, but of peace. The lyrics I added myself. I've learned to be the echo and the voice, the silence and the song. I've learned I never had to choose. I was both all along. And maybe that was the real transformation, not changing who I was, but accepting all of who I'd always been. Rina wasn't a mask. Ryan wasn't a memory. Together, they were the melody that made me whole. As I closed my notebook for the last time, I whispered to the quiet room. This isn't an ending. It's just me, finally, freely me. And outside, the city kept breathing. Alive, unafraid. Just like I finally was.